The air in Maya's dorm room smelled of fresh paint, industrial-grade carpet cleaner, and the faint, hopeful scent of new beginnings. It was a smell I wanted to bottle up and keep forever. We'd spent the afternoon unpacking boxes, a chaotic ballet of books, clothes, and string lights. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, were there, playing the part of doting grandparents to perfection. Dad had expertly assembled a complicated-looking bookshelf in under 20 minutes, while Mom had folded Maya's sweaters into neat, colorful stacks, clucking about how she'd need to eat more than ramen noodles. We were all laughing, high on the adrenaline of this monumental life change. My daughter, my brilliant, funny, kind daughter, was a college student. I'd done it. As a single mother, against odds that had often surmountable, I had gotten her here. A wave of pride so fierce it almost buckled my knees washed over me as I watched Maya tack a poster of her favorite band to the stark white wall. She looked so young, so ready to take on the world. I wanted to give her that world and everything in it. That's why I've been so meticulous, so disciplined for the past 4 years. Every month without fail. We were sitting on her new IKEA sofa, a slightly lumpy but cheerful thing we'd bought on sale, sipping lukewarm sodas from paper cups. The mood was winding down, a comfortable quiet settling over us. It was the perfect moment. So I began, my voice casual, light. The money has been coming through, okay, right? I just wanted to make sure the account is all set up properly. I smiled at Maya. Is $2,000 a month enough for books and supplies and maybe a little fun? I can try to stretch a bit more if you need it. Maya tilted her head, her brow furrowing in a way that was so familiar it made my heart ache. It was the same expression she'd had as a toddler when trying to figure out a particularly tricky puzzle. What money are you talking about? The question was soft, genuinely curious, and it landed in the cheerful room with the force of a physical blow. The air crackled. The hum of the mini fridge suddenly seemed deafening. I felt a nervous laugh bubble up. What do you mean, sweetie? The college fund. The $2,000 a month I've been sending since you started high school. For this, I gestured around the room, at the new laptop on her desk, at the stacks of textbooks we'd just bought. For all of this, she just stared at me, her confusion solidifying into a hard, undeniable certainty. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. You haven't sent me any money. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my veins. This had to be a mistake. A technical glitch. A banking error. Of course I have, I said, my voice a little too high. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy. I'll show you. I set up an automatic transfer to that savings account Dad helped me open for you years ago. It's been going out on the 1st of every month for 48 months straight. And that's when I saw them. My parents. They were sitting on the edge of Maya's new bed, and they had frozen. Not just sitting still, but frozen. My father, Richard, who was always so animated, his hands always moving, was perfectly rigid. His face, usually ruddy with a healthy tan from his daily golf games, had gone a ghastly, papery white. My mother, Eleanor, had her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like she was staring at a ghost. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the warmth and joy out of the air. It was their faces, their shared, synchronized panic. That's when I knew. This wasn't a bank error. This was something else. Something terrible. My hands were shaking as I opened my banking app. I scrolled back, month after month, year after year. There it was, in crisp, digital black and white. Recurring transfer to Maya Genzen College. Fund. Amount. $2,000. 48 times. $96,000. I angled the phone screen towards Maya, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. See, look, it's all here. Maya leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. She pointed a trembling finger at the account number. Mom, that's not my account number. It's close, but the last 2 digits are wrong. I zoomed in. She was right. 47. Her account number ended in 74. A simple transposition. A typo. It could still be a mistake. A stupid, costly mistake that the bank needed to fix immediately. I looked from the phone to my father. He was an accountant, retired now, but his entire life had been built on precision, on the unerring certainty of numbers. He was the one who had insisted on setting up the account for me. You're too much of an artist, Sarah, he'd said, a familiar, condescending affection in his voice. Let me handle the numbers. We'll make sure Maya is taken care of. He was the one who had given me the account number, written down on a crisp piece of his personal stationery. I looked at him, pleading with my eyes for an explanation. A simple, logical, non-monstrous explanation. He wouldn't meet my days. His eyes were fixed on a spot on the floor, his jaw working silently. It was my mother who broke. A choked sob escaped from behind her hand. Richard, she whispered, her voice a ragged thread. Oh, Richard. My father finally looked up, not at me, but at my mother. And in his eyes I saw it all. Guilt, fear, and a flicker of something else. Resentment. He looked at me and his expression hardened. The panic was replaced by a cold, defiant wall. It was for her own good, he said, his voice low and gravelly. The words made no sense. They were a random collection of sounds in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. What? I whispered. What was for her own good? The money, he said, gaining a sliver of his old authority back. We were managing it for her. For you. You're not responsible with money, Sarah. You never have been. We were protecting it. Protecting it. The words echoed in the cavernous space that had opened up inside my chest. He wasn't saying they'd found a typo and fixed it. He wasn't saying the money was safe in another account. He was confessing. They had created a ghost account. For 4 years, every month, they had deliberately, methodically siphoned away the money I had sacrificed so much for. The late nights I'd spent working on freelance projects until my eyes burned. The vacations I'd never taken. The old car I kept repairing because a new one was a luxury I couldn't afford. The constant, grinding anxiety of making ends meet as a single parent. All of it. Every sacrifice, every ounce of effort had been funneled directly into their pockets. I looked at Maya. Her face was a mask of disbelief and hurt. Tears welled in her eyes and one spilled over, tracing a slow, silent path down her cheek. She wasn't just seeing her grandparents. She was seeing strangers. Monsters who wore the faces of the people she loved. The stringlets she'd so happily hung just an hour ago now seemed to mock us, their cheerful twinkle obscene in the suffocating darkness that had fallen over the room. The bookshelf my father had built stood as a monument to the lie. The neatly folded sweaters were a testament to my mother's betrayal. Everything in that room, everything about that day, was a lie. The pride I'd felt, the sense of accomplishment, it was all a mirage. I had been walking through a life they had curated, a reality they had manipulated, and I had never even known. The shock was so profound it was physical. I felt dizzy, nauseous. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room, a punctuation mark at the end of my old life and the beginning of this new, terrifying reality. My parents, the two people who were supposed to be my safety net, my staunchest supporters, had been stealing from me, from their own granddaughter. And they had done it while smiling to my face, all while telling me they were proud. The drive home was a 3-hour descent into a special kind of hell. We'd left Maya at her dorm, a hollowed-out version of the excited girl from that morning. I'd held her tight, whispering promises I didn't know if I could keep, my voice cracking. "I will fix this. I promise you I will fix this." Leaving her there, alone in that room full of lies, felt like leaving a part of my own body behind. My parents sat in the back of my car, a 2008 Honda that suddenly felt like a hearse. The silence was a living entity, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by my mother's occasional pathetic sniffles. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, my gaze fixed on the endless gray ribbon of the highway. My mind wasn't on the road. It was a raging inferno of memories, each one now tainted, recontextualized by their monstrous confession. I saw my father sitting at my kitchen table a year ago, helping me with my taxes. He'd frowned at my income statement. "It's a good thing we have that nest egg growing for Maya, Sarah. This freelance work is so unpredictable." He patted my hand, a gesture I'd then interpreted as paternal concern. Now I saw it for what it was, the gloating of a thief checking on his loot. I saw my mother taking me out for lunch on my birthday, insisting on paying. "Let me treat you, dear. I know things are tight," she'd sighed sympathetically as I debated between the chicken salad and the slightly cheaper soup. All the while, thousands of my own dollars were sitting in an account they controlled, probably paying for the very meal she was using to patronize me. The injustice of it was a physical sensation, a coiling knot of acid in my stomach. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of their deception. They had watched me struggle. They had offered platitudes and token gestures of help while systematically bleeding me dry. They had stolen my agency, my pride, my truth. They had made me believe I was less than I was, that I was barely scraping by when in reality I had been providing. I had been successful. They had stolen that victory from me. About an hour into the drive, my father cleared his throat. The sound was an act of aggression in the tense silence. "Sarah, I think you're overreacting." I didn't turn around. I didn't take my eyes off the road. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my temples. "Overreacting?" The word came out as a low growl. "You stole nearly $100,000 from me from your granddaughter, and you think I'm overreacting?" "We didn't steal it," he said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that sent a fresh wave of fury through me. "It was a custodial account. We were safeguarding it. You're too emotional with money. You would have frittered it away on art supplies or some other nonsense." The condescension was staggering. My nonsense had paid for my daughter's entire childhood. My nonsense was the very source of the funds he'd been pilfering. "Frittered it away." I finally snapped, my voice rising. "I would have invested it. I would have used it to get a better car, one that doesn't break down every 6 months. I would have taken Maya on a real vacation just once. I would have had a safety net, a cushion, something other than the constant, gnawing anxiety you watched me live with every single day. Don't you dare tell me what I would have done with my own money." "See," he shot back, his voice sharp. "This is what I mean. You're hysterical. We did the right thing. That money is safe. It's been invested properly, earning a good return. Far better than you could have managed. Where is it?" I demanded, my voice dangerously quiet. "Where is the money, Dad?" There was a pause. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him exchange a look with my mother. She was shaking her head, her eyes pleading. "It's in a diversified portfolio," he said, the words slick with jargon. "Equities, bonds. It's all very secure. I want the account number. I want the login. I want it all transferred back to me. Now." Another silence. This one was heavier, more damning. "Well, that's not entirely possible at the moment," he said, the bluster gone, replaced by a slight tremor. "Some of it is tied up in long-term investments. There would be penalties for early withdrawal. Penalties? I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that filled the small car. Penalties. You're worried about penalties? The truth was dawning in all its sordid, pathetic detail. They hadn't just saved it. They had used it. They had spent it. That cruise to Alaska they took last year, the one they'd said was from their retirement savings, that was my money. The new landscaping at their house, the expensive golf clubs my father had bought himself for his birthday. My money. My late nights, my sacrificed weekends, my constant worry, all of it had been converted into their comfortable, leisurely lifestyle. They hadn't been safeguarding my daughter's future. They'd been funding their present. You spent it, I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of another physical blow. Oh my God, you spent it? My mother started crying in earnest now, ugly, gulping sobs. We were going to pay it back, Sarah. We swear, she wailed. We just had a few unexpected expenses. The market was down. Your father's pension. We always meant to put it back before Maya needed it. The excuses were pathetic, a transparent tapestry of lies. They never intended to pay it back. They had been caught, that's all. If I hadn't asked Maya that one simple question, they would have let me go on sending them $2,000 every month, and they would have kept on spending it. The manipulation was so deep, so insidious, it was hard to comprehend. I thought about all the advice my father had given me over the years. Don't invest in that new computer, Sarah. Your old one is fine. Maybe you should cut back on Maya's extracurriculars. They're so expensive. Are you sure you can afford that apartment? Every piece of advice wasn't guidance. It was sabotage. He was actively working to keep me financially insecure, to make me feel small and dependent, to justify his theft in his own twisted mind. He needed me to be the irresponsible artist so he could be the prudent financial patriarch. It was a role he had written for us, a narrative he had enforced with 1,000 tiny cuts over the years. By the time I pulled into their driveway to drop them off, my anger had cooled into something harder and more dangerous, a cold, clear resolve. I put the car in park and turned to face them for the first time. I looked at their tear-streaked, guilty faces, and I felt nothing. No love, no pity. The bond that had connected us my entire life had been irrevocably severed. Get out of my car, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. My father started to speak. Sarah, let's just talk about this rationally. There's nothing to talk about. I cut him off. You are thieves. You stole from your child and your grandchild. You're strangers to me. Get out. They scrambled out of the car, looking old and pathetic under the harsh glare of the porch light. I didn't wait for them to get inside. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway without a second glance, and drove away. As I drove into the night, the full scope of their injustice settled over me. They hadn't just stolen $96,000. They had stolen my past, warping my memories. They had stolen my present, filling it with a rage and betrayal so profound it felt like it might consume me. And they had tried to steal my daughter's future. That was the one thing I would not allow. But anger was no longer just a hot flush of emotion. It was fuel. It was the engine that would drive me forward. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the irresponsible artist who couldn't manage her own life. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The week that followed was a blur of gray. I moved through my days like a ghost, haunted by the specter of my parents' betrayal. Every corner of my small apartment held a memory now poisoned. The ceramic mug my mother had given me for Mother's Day felt like a prop from a horror movie. The framed photo of my father holding a baby Maya on his shoulders was a monument to a lie. I packed it all away in a cardboard box and shoved it into the back of a closet, a futile attempt to quarantine the infection. Sleep offered no escape. I jolt awake in the dead of night, my heart racing, the scene in Maya's dorm room playing on a relentless loop. The anger was a constant, simmering companion, but beneath it was a chasm of grief and a paralyzing sense of helplessness. What could I do? Sue my own parents? Drag our family through a public, humiliating legal battle? The thought was nauseating. They were counting on that. They were counting on my shame, my desire to avoid conflict, my residual, conditioned instinct to keep the family peace. I spoke to Maya every day. Her voice was my only lifeline. She was trying to be strong for me, her tone bright and steady, but I could hear the tremor of hurt underneath. "How are you, Mom?" She'd ask, and I'd lie. "I'm okay, sweetie. I'm figuring it out," but I wasn't. I was drowning. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was listlessly sorting through old file boxes in my home office, a space I'd once shared with my father when he'd come over to help with my bookkeeping. I was looking for old tax documents, though I wasn't sure why. It just felt like I needed to do something. Most of the boxes were filled with old invoices and receipts. But in the bottom of one, tucked beneath a stack of decade-old utility bills, was a dark green, leather-bound ledger. I didn't recognize it at first. It was the kind of thing an old-school accountant would use, heavy and official. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The first page was titled, in my father's obsessively neat, angular handwriting, S. Jensen Custodial Account, managed by R. Jensen. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I flipped through the pages. It was all there. Every single one of my $2,000 monthly transfers was meticulously recorded. But that wasn't all. Alongside each deposit in a separate column were withdrawals. And next to each withdrawal was a note. $4,250, Celebrity Cruise Lines, Alaska. $1,800, Green Valley Country Club annual dues. $7,300, Thompson Landscaping. It was a detailed, chronological confession of their theft. He had documented his crimes with the same precision he used to balance a corporate budget. The arrogance was breathtaking. He must have used this ledger to track his scheme, to know exactly how much of my money he had available to spend at any given time. And then he'd forgotten it here, in my house. It was a mistake born of pure hubris. But as I turned more pages, a new, colder dread settled in. There were other sections. Collins Trust, managed by R. Jensen. Collins was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. D. Peterson Portfolio, managed by R. Jensen. David Peterson was my cousin. My father hadn't just been stealing from me. He had a system. He was a predator who preyed on the people who trusted him most, leveraging his financial expertise as a weapon. This ledger wasn't just a record of his theft from me. It was a map of his entire shadow empire, built on the financial abuse of his own family. The helplessness that had been suffocating me for a week began to recede, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon I needed. It was no longer just my word against theirs. It was his own words, his own numbers, his own meticulous handwriting, damning him on every page. That night, I called Maya and told her what I'd found. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve that made me prouder than I had ever been. "Mom, they didn't just steal from you. They stole from us. And it sounds like they've hurt other people too. You have to fight this. We have to fight this." Her words were the final push I needed. The you became a we. I wasn't alone in this. The next morning, I started researching lawyers. I didn't want a bulldog from a big downtown firm. I needed someone who would understand the nuances, the deep emotional trauma of a family betrayal. I found her on the third page of a Google search, Anya Sharma, a solo practitioner whose website mentioned a focus on financial abuse within families. Her photo showed a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. I called and made an appointment. I walked into Anya Sharma's office 2 days later, the green ledger clutched in my hands like a holy relic. The office was small and tidy, filled with thriving plants and shelves of law books. Anya greeted me not from behind a big desk, but from a comfortable armchair. She poured me a cup of tea and just listened. For a full hour I talked. I told her everything, from the joyful afternoon in Maya's dorm room to the horrifying drive home to the discovery of the ledger. I cried, I raged. I expressed my shame and my guilt for not seeing it sooner. Anya never interrupted. She just listened, her expression a perfect blend of empathy and focused intelligence. When I finally finished, exhausted and emotionally raw, she leaned forward. "Sarah," she said, her voice calm and firm. "First, I want you to hear this. None of this is your fault. Abusers, especially financial abusers, are masters of manipulation. They prey on trust, and it is not a character flaw to trust your own parents." Hearing that, a simple, unequivocal validation felt like a dam breaking inside me. "Second," she continued, "what they did is not a family misunderstanding. It is a crime. It's called conversion, it's a form of theft, and it's a breach of fiduciary duty. This ledger," she gestured to the book on the coffee table between us, "is what we call a smoking gun. Your father has done most of our work for us. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within me." Anya then walked me through the process, demystifying the legal jargon. She explained subpoenas, forensic accounting, depositions, and mediation. She laid out a clear step-by-step strategy. It wouldn't be easy, she warned. It would be emotionally taxing. My parents would likely fight back, try to smear my name, and paint me as the villain. But she said, her eyes meeting mine, "You have the truth on your side. And you have this ledger. We can get your money back, Sarah, and more importantly, we can get your power back." I walked out of her office and into the bright afternoon sun. And for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe again. The gray fog had lifted. I had a path. I had an advocate. I had evidence. The hope was no longer a fragile flicker. It was a steady, growing flame. I was no longer a victim, passively reeling from a terrible betrayal. I was a fighter, and I was about to go to war. The weeks that followed were an education in the grim mechanics of justice. Under Anya's guidance, I transformed from a grieving daughter into a reluctant detective, and my small apartment became a war room. The initial step was a formal letter of demand drafted by Anya sent to my parents. It was a cold, precise document outlining the facts, referencing the discovered ledger, and demanding the immediate return of the $96,000 plus interest. It was, Anya explained, a necessary legal step before filing a lawsuit, a final chance for them to do the right thing. Their response came not from them, but from a lawyer whose letterhead was embossed with the name of a notoriously aggressive firm. The letter was a masterpiece of gaslighting and intimidation. It claimed the money was a gift, freely given. It accused me of being an ungrateful and unstable daughter, attempting to extort my loving elderly parents. It dismissed the ledger as a misinterpreted personal document. It was a declaration of war. "Good," Anya said when I read her the letter over the phone, my voice shaking with rage. "They've shown their hand. They're going to play dirty. Now we can proceed without any illusions." The first real strategic move was to hire a forensic accountant named Ben. He was a quiet, unassuming man with glasses, perched on his nose, and an almost supernatural ability to make numbers sing. I sat with him and Anya in a conference room as he projected my father's bank records onto a screen records Anya had obtained via subpoena. It was like watching a magician reveal his trick. then showed us how my $2,000 transfer would land in the ghost account on the first of the month. Then he would trace it. Within days, smaller specific amounts would move out. $750 to a Visa card. Ben had cross-referenced the statements, and that card had paid for my parents' weekly fine dining. $1,200 to an investment account in my father's name alone. He even found the direct payment to the cruise line, a perfect match to the entry in my father's ledger. He was building an airtight, undeniable case, brick by digital brick. The paper trail was damning. While Ben worked his magic, my front in this war was social and familial. It was the hardest part. Anya advised me that we needed to know the full extent of my father's activities. I had to call my Aunt Carol. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. Carol had always been my favorite aunt, warm and funny, but she idolized my father. I started slowly telling her about the discrepancy with Maya's college fund. At first, she was defensive on his behalf. "Oh, honey, there must be some mistake. Your father is so meticulous. He's been handling my husband's retirement trust for years. He saved us a fortune." My heart sank. This was exactly what I had feared. But I pushed on, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Aunt Carol, I found some of his records. He kept a ledger, I think. I think you should look at your statements very, very closely. I think you should ask him for a full accounting of the trust. I didn't accuse. I just planted a seed of doubt." I could hear the shift in her tone, from certainty to a flicker of uneasy curiosity. I did the same with my cousin David. The reaction was similar. Loyalty warred with a newfound sliver of suspicion. I felt like a saboteur planting bombs in the foundations of my own family. But Anya had been right. My father's greatest weapon was the trust everyone had in him. We had to dismantle that trust before we could get to the truth. As news of my inquiry spread through the family grapevine, the backlash began. My parents went on the offensive. They called relatives, weaving a tale of a daughter who had fallen into debt and was now trying to steal their retirement savings. They portrayed me as mentally unbalanced, influenced by a shrewd, money-grubbing lawyer. Some family members called me, their voices laced with pity and disapproval. "Sarah, your parents are heartbroken. How can you do this to them?" Each call was a fresh wound. I started screening my calls, my home no longer a sanctuary but a fortress under siege. The tension escalated when my father showed up at my door unannounced one evening. I saw him through the peephole, his face set in a grim mask. I didn't open the door. I spoke to him through the wood, my voice loud and clear. "You are not welcome here. You need to speak to my lawyer." He banged on the door, his voice rising, a mixture of pleading and fury. "Sarah, don't be a fool. You're tearing this family apart. You'll be left with nothing and no one." I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my body trembling, until he finally gave up and left. That night, I installed a new deadbolt and the security camera. The quiet siege had turned hot. Through it all, Anya was my anchor. We spoke daily. She prepared me for every step, every possible countermove. She was more than a lawyer. She was a strategist, a therapist, a general. We were a team, and our team was growing. A week after my call, Aunt Carol called back. Her voice was a choked whisper. She had asked my father for the trust statements. He had stalled, given her excuses. So she'd gone directly to the investment firm. She discovered that the trust, which was supposed to be worth nearly $500,000, held less than $50,000. The rest had been siphoned off over a decade, transferred to the same accounts where my money had gone. The bomb I had planted had detonated. The strategy was now twofold: build an undeniable legal case and carefully dismantle the social shield my father had built around himself. Anya filed the official lawsuit, a thick document detailing the fraud, breach of trust, and conversion. Citing both my case and my aunt's, the final piece of our strategy was preparing for the deposition. Anya spent hours with me role-playing the session. She played the part of my father's aggressive lawyer, firing invasive, accusatory questions at me. Isn't it true you've always been jealous of your parents' financial success? Can you prove you didn't authorize these transfers as a gift? Why are you trying to destroy your elderly father's reputation? It was brutal, but necessary. She was forging my pain and anger into a weapon, sharpening my testimony until it was a clean, unbreakable blade of truth. By the time the deposition date was set, I was no longer the trembling woman who had walked into her office weeks ago. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, focused determination. My parents had underestimated me. They saw a scattered artist, an emotional single mother. They never saw the woman who had built a life and a business from scratch, the mother who had burned down the world to protect her child. They had started a war with that woman, and now we were ready for the final battle. The deposition took place in a soul-crushingly bland conference room on the 12th floor of a downtown office building. The air was stale with the smell of old coffee and recycled air. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim, fluorescent lights above, creating a distorted mirror of the faces gathered around it. It was a far cry from a dramatic courtroom, but the tension was more potent, more intimately suffocating. On one side of the table sat my father, Richard, and my mother, Eleanor, with their lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Marcus Thorne who looked like he'd been assembled from a kid of corporate aggression. On our side, it was just me, Anya, and a court stenographer who was setting up her equipment with an air of bored indifference. My parents wouldn't look at me. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, attempting an aura of imperious disdain. My mother seemed to have shrunk into herself, her gaze fixed on her tightly clasped hands. They looked smaller, older, and utterly pathetic without the familiar backdrop of their home and the armor of their lives. Anya began, her voice calm and methodical. She established the facts, leading my father through a series of simple, yes or no questions about his background as an accountant, his relationship with me, and the fact that he had helped me set up the account for Maya's college fund. He was arrogant at first, answering in condescending, expansive paragraphs, trying to portray himself as the benevolent patriarch. Thorne, his lawyer, did nothing to stop him. It was a classic rope-a-dope strategy. Let the arrogant man talk. Let him build his own gallows. Anya then moved to the account itself. Mr. Jensen, you provided your daughter with the account and routing numbers for this fund, correct? I did. I was happy to facilitate her desire to save for her granddaughter's future. And you were aware that for 48 consecutive months, she transferred $2,000 into that account? I was aware that she was making contributions, yes. Then, Anya slid the first exhibit across the table, a certified copy of the bank statement for the ghost account. Mr. Jensen, can you identify this account? Is this the account into which my client made those deposits? My father glanced at it. A flicker of sweat appeared on his brow. It appears to be, yes, and can you confirm that the sole signatories on this account are you, Richard Jensen, and your wife, Eleanor Jensen? He hesitated. Thorne leaned over and whispered something to him. Yes, my father finally mumbled. Anya continued, her pace quickening. She produced the next exhibit, the forensic accountant's report. She walked him through it, page by devastating page. Mr. Jensen, on June 12th of last year, my client's $2,000 deposit was made. On June 15th, a withdrawal of $4,250 was made from this account, payable to Celebrity Cruise Lines. Can you explain that transaction? My father sputtered. That was An investment decision? A liquidity transfer? A liquidity transfer to a cruise line? Anya asked, one eyebrow arched. She didn't wait for an answer. And this payment of $1,800 to the Green Valley Country Club, was that also an investment for your granddaughter's future? The room was silent except for the frantic clicking of the stenographer's keys. My father's facade was beginning to crack. His face was flushed, his earlier confidence evaporating into a cloud of panicked sweat. Then Anya brought out the ledger. She placed the heavy, green leather book in the center of the table. Mr. Jensen, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, do you recognize this book? My father stared at the ledger as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't speak. Let me refresh your memory, Anya said, opening it to the first page. This is a ledger you kept in your own handwriting, detailing the management of what you titled the S. Jensen custodial account. Is this your handwriting, sir? He was trapped. To deny it was to commit perjury. To admit it was to confess. He looked at his lawyer, who offered a barely perceptible shake of his head. Thorne knew the game was up. I may have used it for some personal notes, my father stammered. Personal notes? Anya flipped a few pages. Let's look at this note here next to a $7,000 withdrawal. It says, Thompson Landscaping, new patio. Is that a correct reading of your note, Mr. Jensen? My mother let out a small, strangled sob. It was over. All of it. The lies, the arrogance, the years of deceit, all laid bare on that polished table under the ugly fluorescent lights. Thorne cleared his throat. I believe we can stipulate that my clients had discretionary control over the funds. I'm not finished, Anya said, cutting him off without raising her voice. She turned to me. Sarah, your turn. This was the moment we had prepared for. This was my catharsis. I looked across the table, not at my father, but directly into my mother's eyes, forcing her to meet my gaze. I don't have any questions, I said, my voice shaking slightly but clear and strong. I have a statement. Thorne started to object, but Anya placed a hand on his arm. Let her speak, Marcus. It's part of the deposition. I took a deep breath. For my entire adult life, you made me feel small. You made me believe I was incompetent, that I was a struggling artist who couldn't manage her own life. Every time I had a small victory, you were there to remind me how precarious it was. Every time I struggled, you were there with a sigh and a look of pity. You cultivated this narrative of my failure, and you did it so you could feel justified in what you were doing. I shifted my gaze to my father. He was staring at the table, his face ashen. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my confidence. You stole my peace of mind. You stole time. Time I could have spent with my daughter instead of working a third freelance job to make ends meet. Moments of joy that were clouded by a financial anxiety you manufactured. You stole my own belief in myself. That is a theft far greater than $96,000. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the cruise or the landscaping or the country club. It's that you watched your granddaughter grow up, knowing you were stealing from her future every single day. You bought her birthday presents with money you had stolen from her. You applauded at her high school graduation, knowing the college fund you claimed to be protecting was being spent on your own selfish desires. That is a level of betrayal I will never comprehend. I paused, letting the words hang in the dead air. But you failed. You thought this would break me, but you have forged me into something stronger. I am not the person you thought I was. I am the woman who discovered your crime. I am the woman who hired a lawyer and built a case. I am the woman who is taking her life back from you. You will give me back every single cent you stole, and then you will disappear from my life and from Maya's life forever, I finished, my voice ringing with a finality that left no room for argument. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. My father looked up at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not anger, but utter abject defeat. He looked like a king whose castle had crumbled to dust around him. Marcus Thorne sighed, a sound of professional resignation. He leaned over to Anya. "My clients are prepared to offer a settlement," he said quietly. "Full repayment, plus damages and all legal fees. We can have the details worked out by the end of the day." Anya nodded. Justice hadn't come with the bang of a gavel. It had come in the quiet, sterile death of a lie. It was the clicking of the stenographer's keyboard recording the truth. It was the sight of my abusers, stripped of their power, exposed and broken. And it was the sound of my own voice, finally speaking my truth, loud and clear and free. It's been 2 years since that day in the conference room. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, a scene from a movie about someone else's life. Other times the memory is so sharp, so visceral, I can still feel the cold, smooth surface of that mahogany table under my fingertips. Healing, I've learned, isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a landscape you learn to navigate with its own seasons of pain and peace. The settlement money arrived a few weeks after the deposition, a wire transfer that appeared in my bank account with a quiet digital hum. It wasn't a lottery win. It didn't feel like a windfall. It felt like a repatriation of stolen territory, the return of something that had been mine all along. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the number on the screen. It was a symbol of justice, yes, but it was also a monument to a profound loss. It was the price of my parents' love. I've had no contact with them since that day. As per the settlement agreement, they are legally restrained from contacting me or Maya. I hear things sometimes through the family grapevine. My Aunt Carol and Cousin David also settled their cases, a quiet, out-of-court affair that nonetheless shattered my father's reputation. They sold their big house. They moved to a smaller condo in a different state. They are, from what I hear, socially and familially adrift, living in a quiet exile of their own making. I don't feel anger towards them anymore. I don't feel much of anything. They are ghosts, figures from a past I have worked very hard to transcend. The first thing I did with the money was not for myself, but for Maya. I paid off her student loans before they could even accrue $1 of interest, ensuring she would graduate into the world free and unburdened. The rest I treated with a reverence it had never been shown before. I didn't use it for cruises or country clubs. I used it to build a foundation. A year ago, I put a down payment on a small house, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a cricked porch and a big backyard filled with unruly rosebush. It's the first home I have ever owned. Every nail I hammer into the walls, every flower I plant in the garden, is an act of reclamation. This house isn't just wood and plaster. It's a physical manifestation of my independence, a sanctuary built not on lies, but on my own hard work and resilience. My freelance graphic design business has flourished in a way I never thought possible. The confidence I gained from fighting my own battles bled into my professional life. I started pitching bigger clients, charging what I was worth, and taking on ambitious projects that once would have intimidated me. It turns out when you're no longer being systematically undermined by the people closest to you, it's amazing how much you can grow. My relationship with Maya is the truest, most beautiful thing in my life. We survived the fire together, and it forged our bond into something unbreakable. She is a remarkable young woman, fiercely intelligent, compassionate, and with a core of strength that reminds me so much of the woman I've had to become. We talk not just as mother and daughter, but as friends, as allies, as two women who know the value of having someone unequivocally in your corner. But the most important part of my new life, the part that gives the deepest meaning to my survival, is what I've built from the ashes of my experience. 6 months ago, I used a portion of the settlement to launch a small nonprofit foundation. I call it the Leisure Project. We run free financial literacy workshops for women, particularly single mothers and those in vulnerable situations. I teach them how to budget, how to invest, how to read a contract, how to spot the red flags of financial abuse. I've partnered with lawyers like Anya and forensic accountants like Ben, who volunteer their time to provide pro bono consultations. I share my story, not the gory details, but the lessons. I talk about how financial abuse often wears the mask of love and concern. I talk about the power of asking questions, of demanding transparency, of trusting your own instincts. I teach women to be the guardians of their own financial lives, to never cede that power to anyone, no matter how much they trust them. Last week, a woman came up to me after a workshop. She was a young mother, her eyes full of tears, but they were tears of empowerment, not despair. "Thank you," she said, clutching my hand. "You've given me the courage to look at my own situation, to ask the hard questions. You've made me feel like I'm not crazy and I'm not alone." In that moment, the entire ordeal clicked into place. The pain wasn't for nothing. The years of struggle, the horrifying revelation, the brutal fight, it was all part of a larger story. It was my training ground. It gave me a voice I didn't know I had and a purpose I never would have found. This morning, I was sitting on my cricked porch, sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over my messy, beautiful garden. My home, my life, my peace. It's not a perfect life, and the scars of my parents' betrayal will always be a part of me. But they are no longer open wounds. They are reminders of my own strength, of my capacity to survive and to build something new and beautiful from the wreckage. I survived the unsent thousands, and now I'm spending the rest of my life making sure that every dollar I earn, every bit of energy I expend, is sent with purpose, with integrity, and with love.